Hi again, and welcome to the Covert Investigation channel. Here I have another story for you, which I do hope you will enjoy. I would like to also thank you for your interest in my channel, as it's very much appreciated. And if you like the story, could you please like, subscribe and ring the bell, as it helps the channel to grow. And once again, thank you. One day in January 1964, the 6th Earl of Lucan George Bingham dropped dead unexpectedly. He had been a good and kindly man as he was mourned. However, a stroke of luck for at least one other man who worshipped luck as some men worship gods. No man could seem better suited for this fate, as fortune had smiled favourably on the new Lord Lucan, known to his closest pals as Lucky. For anyone who chooses to romanticise the British aristocracy, there could be no figure more ideal than Lucky Lucan. Lord Lucan was a dashingly handsome man. At a height of more than 6 feet 4 inches tall, he was a dedicated sportsman with a sense of proper manners and of doing the right thing. In short, the 7th Earl of Lucan was a beautiful example of what used to be called good breeding. As things would turn out, he was more endangered than anyone could have known. Because of one fateful day, Lady Fortune would end her loving gaze on Lucky and look another way, and on that day he would disappear into thin air, accused of the brutal murder of a young woman and the attempted murder of his wife. Lord Lucan's upbringing had been typical of an Englishman whose flawless pedigree reached back into Anglo-Saxon times. He had attended Eton and served in the Coldstream Guards. He had raced speedboats and ridden on the army bobsled team in international competitions. Upon his father's death, he took his place in the House of Lords. His political views were just to the right of Genghis Khan's. He had worked, but not with too much diligence, as a merchant banker, until he came into his inheritance. But he was much better at gaming than at working, and as soon as he could afford it, he devoted himself to gaming full-time. Despite his impressive family tree, Lucan's forebears were something of an embarrassment to him. As Elizabethan Richard Bingham, military governor of Connaught in Western Ireland, had ordered the slaughter of shipwrecked Spanish sailors in the aftermath of the Spanish Armada. Lucky's great-great-grandfather, the 3rd Earl of Lucan, had ordered the disastrous charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava in 1854. Generations of schoolchildren on both sides of the Atlantic have had stuffed down their memories the famous poem about the noble 600 who rode into the Valley of Death against the volleying and thundering cannons that day. And the someone who had blundered in the poem was none other than a 19th century George Bingham. Military historians are divided about whether the earlier Lord Lucan deserved full blame for the disaster. But the affront to his genetic code was still chafing on the 7th Earl, 120 years after the fact. If this was not enough, Lucan's own parents had somehow acquired liberal views. The 6th Earl had been commander of the Coldstream Guards and served with distinction in World War II. His failing was that he had not developed into a proper Tory. He had in fact been chief opposition whip for the Labour Party in the House of Lords during the last 10 years of his life. Lucan's mother was also a prominent activist in Labour Party politics. To Lucan and his ultra-conservative circle of friends, she might as well have been in league with the Kremlin. In 1960, Lady Luck intervened to decide the course of the balance of the future Lord Lucan's life. During a 2-day session of Chemin de Fer, a card game similar to Baccarat, the 25-year-old Richard John Bingham won £20,000. From that memorable card game going forward, Lord Lucan was convinced he had the touch of Midas in games of chance. On November 28, 1963, Lucky took a wife. The former Veronica Duncan was elevated through the marriage from a solidly middle-class life. Her father had been an army major, and her stepfather a hotel manager. His sister had married a millionaire friend of Lucan's named Bill Shand Kidd. Veronica and Lucky had met at a golf tournament and married after an engagement. Veronica had a pretty face, a keen intelligence, a sharp wit, and according to Lucan's friends, an equally sharp tongue. She stood a full head and shoulders beneath her husband and weighed less than 100 pounds. She looked sensitive and frail. She reportedly had suffered from emotional disorders as early as age 8. In the beginning, there was said to be a genuine attachment between Lord and Lady Lucan. They took up residence in a 3-storey home at 46 Lower Belgrave Street, in a blue-blooded section of London known as Belgravia, within a quarter mile of Buckingham Palace. Together, they produced 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. But as time wore on, it became painfully clear that little besides the children was holding the marriage together. Veronica had dreamed of the grand life of an aristocrat, with dazzling dinner parties and weekends in great country houses. Instead, she found herself increasingly isolated, with a husband who spent his days and nights in gambling clubs. What little social life the couple had when Lady Lucan joined him as an unwelcome and sometimes carping visitor. She was not a popular figure with Lucan's pals. Lucky's favourite haunt was the Claremont Club, a private gambling establishment run by an old-school chum of his, named John Aspinall. When he wasn't feeding the gentry at his club, Aspinall fed his collection of tigers at the private zoo he maintained on the grounds of his country home. The Claremont was as exclusive gets, catering to that subset of the rich and the titled who had been to the right schools and held the right opinions. Like many other gamblers, Lucky Lucan appears to have suffered from an inflated sense of his own skills. On the whole, the time he spent at the Claremont was a downward slide. By the early 1970s, he had gambled away most of his liquid assets and been reduced to the role of a house player, used by Aspinall to attract other gamblers with his title, good looks, and his charm. Around the same time, his already shaky marriage shook apart. In early 1973, Lucan moved out of his house on Lower Belgrave and moved to a basement bachelor's flat on Elizabeth Street, about a half-mile away. The whole problem, he told friends, was Lady Lucan. He claimed that she was batty, claiming to be unfit to look after the children. Lucan wanted custody of the kids, which began a long legal struggle. Several people who knew him well, including his own mother, have described him as obsessed with getting the children away from his wife. Lucan had begun complaining in public about his wife's mental problems as early as 1967, after the birth of their son George. He tried to put her in a psychiatric hospital that year, but she refused to be admitted. She did, however, submit to injections of mood-controlling drugs and to consultations with psychiatrists. After reported episodes of hallucinations and paranoid fantasies, Lucan tried again to commit his wife for treatment in 1971. She got as far as the hospital door before making a run for it. During the custody battle, Lucan started carrying a concealed tape recorder to demonstrate how unbalanced he claimed his wife was. He also recorded interviews with the children, the nannies, and anybody else who could say anything that reflected badly on Lady Lucan's state of mind. He spent more than he could afford on private detectives to maintain surveillance on his house and follow his wife when she went out. At one point, only weeks before the custody hearing, he and 2 private detectives scooped up the children and the nanny from a park and took them to live in his flat. Despite his tape recordings and his medical testimony and the affidavits of his friends, Lord Lucan lost the custody case in June of 1973. It did not help when Veronica claimed he had once tried to strangle her, and her statement was supported by a nanny. He had spent a reported £40,000 in his unsuccessful struggle. It was a fight Lord Lucan had expected to win. He was, after all, the heir to centuries of privilege. His ancestors had literally been the law in their domains. It must have seemed his world was ending around him. He began to fret aloud about the miscegenation of the British people, and he and his far-right Claremont cronies discussed bloody solutions that bordered on the neo-fascist. To add insult to injury, the Claremont had been sold to Playboy and was no longer the exclusive retreat it had been. With the loss of the custody case, Lucan seemed to settle into a siege mentality and to take on the appearance of a desperate man. Combined with his gambling losses, the custody fight had left him in serious debt. His income would not cover his overdrafts at 2 of the banks he used, or his debts to his landlord. His gunsmith, and the assorted others, including the cleaners who looked after his coronation robes, and the jewellers who had sold him his crocodile watch strap. By selling some of the family silver, he raised enough to support his gambling habit for the time being. He had begun drinking heavily and gambling more recklessly. At the age of 39, his life had settled into a relentless routine, contained within the few square miles of London's West End with which he was most familiar. He rose late each day and began with martinis at the Claremont Club. His lunch order could have been imprinted on the ticket. It was invariably the same meal of smoked salmon and lamb cutlets. The afternoon was given to backgammon or bridge. In the evening, it was chemin de fer or blackjack. He had become an insomniac and he played until he was tired. He then retired to his flat. On the next day, he repeated the same actions in the same order. On Thursday night, November 7th, 1974, the routine ended abruptly. The Lucan children, Lord Bingham, aged 7, Lady Frances, aged 10, and Lady Camilla, who was aged 4 at the time, were being bedded down as usual in the house on Lower Belgrave Street. The children's nanny, a 29-year-old woman named Sandra Rivet, normally had Thursdays off. However, on this Thursday, she had a cold and had remained in the house. Unfortunately, the cold would be fatal. The house had 4 levels. The first was a basement containing a kitchen and a breakfast room. Lady Lucan's bedroom was on the 3rd level, and the children's bedroom on the 4th. On the night in question, Lady Lucan descended to the basement just before 9 p.m. when the television news came on, as she brewed a pot of tea. On this night, however, the eldest child, 10-year-old Lady Frances, was still awake and watching television in her mother's room. Sandra Rivet knocked on the door and offered to go down and make the tea. When she reached the ground floor level and tried to switch on the light at the basement stairs, nothing happened. She had no way of knowing it, but someone had unscrewed the bulb and left it lying on a chair. She started down the stairs in the dark. She was near the same size and shape as Lady Lucan. As she reached the breakfast room, someone struck out in the darkness and hit her squarely on the front of the head with a length of lead pipe. It was a crushing blow, and there were 9 or 10 more to go with it. At least 4 blows caught her in the head, cracking her skull. The others landed on her shoulders, her neck and her arms. She died within a couple of minutes, probably while unconscious, of suffocation caused by internal bleeding into her throat. Her blood covered the breakfast room floor in a thick pool and splattered the wall. Her attacker then bent her body double and stuffed her into a heavy canvas US mail bag. Roughly 15 minutes later, Lady Lucan began to wonder what had become of Sandra and her tea. According to the account she gave the police and later a coroner's inquest, she then descended the stairs herself. On the ground floor, she noticed there was no light coming from the basement. She heard a sound from the ground floor cloakroom at the entrance hall, and as she moved toward the sound, someone stepped out and hit her on the head with a heavy club. He then hit her several more times. Lady Lucan was luckier than Sandra Rivet. She survived the attack. She also swears that the man swinging the club was her husband. She says she first knew it was he when she screamed and she recognized his voice as he said, "Shut up." She says he then thrust 3 gloved fingers down my throat, and a deadly hand-to-hand struggle commenced. He tried to strangle her and to gouge out her eyes. She remembers being on the ground and then somehow getting a firm grip on his testicles. This caused him to turn her loose. The 2 combatants were exhausted. According to Lady Lucan, upon catching their breath, they agreed, as only 2 proper English aristos could under the circumstances, to sit down and have a chat about recent developments. While they talked, she was rapidly losing blood from several serious head wounds. She says she asked about the nanny and he admitted killing her. He said he had mistaken Sandra for her. After this revelation, Veronica said she was thirsty and Lucky got her a drink of water. Then they went upstairs to her bedroom. The 10-year-old Lady Frances was still watching television. She viewed her blood-drenched parents and was sent upstairs to bed. Together, Lady Lucan says she and her husband examined her injuries in the bathroom, and she then lay down on the bed on a towel he provided. While he was in the bathroom wetting another towel to clean her wounds, she jumped from the bed and escaped. Hi again. If you liked the story and would like some more, could you please subscribe and ring the bell, as more stories will soon be uploaded. And once again, thank you.